Do you mind sharing with us then the channeling that you got today, or the
we will do that today.
Oh,
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll see.
Beautiful.
So I am going to read it. It is 2 typed pages, and we talked about typing versus writing a little bit earlier, and I can keep up a lot faster with typing. I used to write, and then it slowed me down. If you're a faster writer than you are a typer, you may want to write. For me, I can get so much more information, and I don't get interrupted as much by typing. So that's just the flow for me. So again, just bear in mind, I started with having the intention of looking for some help. And this was another question you had asked me. I'm not trying to get off the topic, but somewhere about halfway through the channeling, I was very aware that the energy shifted, right? So it's kind of like if you're doing mediumship is what I'll equate it to. And you have 2 spirits that are communicating with you. One has this energy, the other one has this energy. So I started off with a particular energy that was helping answer my question. And about halfway through, I felt a different spirit step forward, felt a different energy come forward. And you'll notice the tone of voice starts changing. The words get a little different because someone else was now contributing to the message. So see if you can identify where the tone starts shifting a little bit. I don't ever interrupt when I'm feeling different energy coming in because I'm interrupting the flow, but I'm very cognizant in the background. Oh, new person, new energy, new information. So, okay.
Beautiful. Yes. Thank you.
All righty. So channeling is not difficult in that it is simply a degree of connection for yourself and others. You do it every day in the confines of your home, but now all we ask is that you be willing to share what you receive with others. This can take place in a variety of ways and methods, and doing it via video is just one of those ways, but not all. Certain messages will be for certain people, while others will resonate with other styles of information reception, video, audio, written, etc. Don't be afraid to try new things. Just set aside your mind and allow the information to come forward in whatever manner best fits the current modality. Be not afraid to jump in with both feet and test the waters. You might be surprised. We have no specific topics for today, only the desire to see you make a deeper connection, surrender to spirit, and trust the process. Let Shay guide you into deeper states until you can relax and control your own downward descent. That is why she's here, a most patient and willing participant who desires to see good, seeks answers of her own, and yet wants to unify those who do this work to create a connection of messages and beings who support the greater good. Be a part of her endeavors and seek to offer aid in the form of answers and guidance for the collective good of this conglomerate. We in spirit need those who are willing to spread the word and can get the messages out. This information must be made manifest to support the purposes of those who desire to make changes in the world and in themselves. To not speak of these things is to be ignored. And how do you feel when your own prayers are met with silence and unanswered wisdom? Does this not make you feel alone and unanswered and even uncared for? We are here, we are listening, and we care. And yet so few turn heavenward for their answers, instead treading in a sea of fear and a quagmire of indecision that does not illuminate their path or the solutions they seek. Man is not the answer, and yet neither are we. We each are our own answers, and the answers we seek and bring into the world is the world that we create for ourselves and for others. It is up to you, meaning those of us here in this world, to change this world. We in spirit can be a supportive guiding light, sending our best wishes, but it is you who must garner the strength, spirit, and love to make the changes this world requires. We in spirit will do all in our power to elicit said changes through the sharing of wisdom and insights. But what you do with this information is up to you. Free will must reign supreme, and so we can only guide, enlighten, share, and uplift. But you can do this on your own with the right tools and love and courage to know that you each have the power to reign supreme in your own personal world. Be not afraid to enlighten others for your sake, but for all mankind. For in the enlightenment, we achieve a status of sainthood that those in spirit glorify, not because we are holy and divine or even special, and yet are we not each divine? Have we not forgotten our own divinity and turned to God in need as if we ourselves are not God himself? This is not sacrilegious, but rather a call to understand that you are made in God's image, a subject of his world and domain. And so all that is accessible to God is accessible to you. The only thing that differs is your feeling of separation from this Godhead source. What separates you then? Fear, anger, personal desire and selfishness, greed, self-pity, trauma, or those other aspects of ego? God has given you an ego to be human and divine in form, and yet you feel forlorn and misbegotten. This is not possible, or else God has erred. But we tell you now, God does not err. He knows and we know, and so too should you know that what you are is divine and righteous and pure and good. Yes, we struggle in human form to understand the divine, but this is the way of it. To be closer to God, we must accept both our humanity and our divinity, for in both we serve God and yield to him, and yet know ourselves as God as well, capable, strong, loving, and serving. So find that which separates you from your divinity and set it free. Love your trauma and your ego, but also set it aside and know the divine. Both will serve you if and when you can see past the soul ego self. It is enough to be whole in spirit, and yet not enough to be whole in form. This is an illusion, for all forms are of perfection and also flawed. Even we here in spirit still struggle to overcompensate for our personal lackings. It is not in death that we find redemption, but in awareness and love and support for our role and that of our fellow man. Divinity is not achieved in form or formlessness, but in the heart of our mind and soul. Awareness and transformation does not elude you. It's here and now and everywhere, available for any and all who seek it. And yet, do you? Are you wallowing in your trauma and tragedy and saying to others, I am flawed, I am sin, or I am unable? We do not negate your troubles and feel sorrow and compassion for the pains of humanity and of all beings. But know that which you seek is at hand, everywhere, here and now. So first ask, do you seek it? That redemption and desire for the divinity that eludes you? If so, then give praise and be glad, for you have begun the journey. But then we ask you to turn heavenward to higher wisdom, not just in spirit form, for greatness exists upon your world as well. Greatness and mastery of self is all about us and abounds even the very ether around us. Let this wisdom and godliness pour into you through information, such as these words you're receiving now, through love and light and in energy, or in any form that supports the transformation you need to rise out of pain and indecision. We cannot promise that the suffering of your life will always be eased, for in some manner it is serving you. But do not be swayed by that suffering to believe you are flawed or erred or less than, or even more importantly, incapable. For somewhere in your suffering is the gift that God is trying to give you, to provide you with the chance for strength, opportunity, community, and even sharing with your fellow man. It is a grand plan. It is a grand plan, but never a plan that cannot be overcome or overcompensated for. Even in the throes of pending death, one learns of the everlasting life that we have been given, and in that we find a new gift. Perspective it is then that you need to have, to see your gifts and blessings in tragedy and to know love in the face of hate. We know it is not easy, and yet implore you to seek God now, not the form of God as you might see, but rather that higher godliness that exists and abounds all around us. Call it love, light, salvation, redemption, or even pacification. but whatever it is grander than all of us, and only with it can you find the light to succeed. Call it into you, not this belief, but the power that illuminates and animates all things. Here you will be renewed and given new directions.
That is beautiful. And
that's how I channel.
Yeah, but that is so amazing because you know what? Honestly, it encompasses so many things we were talking about today.
It did. And which was funny because as we were talking prior to the recording, I'm like, that's so funny. That came up in the channeling today. That's so funny. That came up in the channeling today before we had our conversation. So,
yeah, so it's like they knew what the conversation or where the conversation was going to go today.
Interesting.
And so they knew that channeling was going to be needed for today. So
I saw some of those parallels there. So I was wondering if you saw them as well, or if I was making them fit.
Yeah, no. Yeah, because I didn't say anything to you what we're going to talk about today. And then look at your channel before we even got together. And that is amazing. So what were you feeling when you channel? Like when you were getting that message today, the words just come and you're typing. Do you conceptualize what's coming through as you're typing? Or
what do you mean? Do I conceptualize it?
Like do you understand? I mean, is it just words is coming down to you as you're typing, or do you know what they're saying? You know how sometimes people just write. I've talked to several people that automatic write, and they're like, I don't even know what I'm writing. My hand is just going and going and going. And then I go back later and I read it and I'm like, oh, wow, that's beautiful. So it's like they're not really conceptualizing what they're writing. They're just typing what's coming in. They're writing what's coming in.
Okay. No, that's a good explanation. I am conceptually aware of what is taking place, which is really interesting. So yes, the words are coming through and I'm just typing it, but I'm very conscious and I'm very aware, which is why I think that the channeling for me, I was having a much more difficult time getting back and relaxing and detaching because I'm used to being very engaged in my channeling. Because again, sometimes I will get visuals. Sometimes there's a great deal of claircognizance that comes with it as well. I hear the words and I'm always writing the words that I hear, but there is just this instantaneous knowing of what is being intended with the words. And that is very claircognizant. So if I were so detached, I think I would miss those aspects and it would make it harder for me to have a discussion about it. Right?
Yeah.
So, sure. But there's no right or wrong way. And I think
there is none. And that's why we're doing this, because we want to show that there are many ways to make that connection. Mm-hmm. And I loved one of the things that they said in there as connect to that higher wisdom, because like I said, when I ask you, well, who are you channeling? Mm-hmm. And it's like, they said, it doesn't matter who you're channeling. It's just getting that higher wisdom.
Right.
It's coming from somewhere, and It could be anywhere. It could be the higher self, could be the galactic family. It could be, source, your spirit guides. It could be coming from anywhere. So I like the verbiage that they said about just connecting to that higher wisdom.
Because you don't know who it's going to be. It's like if you sit down for a mediumship session with someone, you don't know what spirit is going to come forward. You really don't. And we shouldn't try to control the session. And so the same thing is with the channeling. I don't want to control it. I think it's human nature. And I think as we advance and develop, we do ask our questions, where is it coming from? That's natural. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So did you notice how the language or the verbiage changed a little bit about halfway through? We started talking about God and godliness and divinity. And of course, on the inside, I cringe, but I don't. That's where I've learned to detach, because a part of me cringes and I'm going, I don't want to go there. I don't like that word, or I don't want to offend anybody, but this is the message and I have to give it the way that I get it. So it shifted, and I'm aware not only of the language shift, but of the energy shift. Okay. So whoever answered me in the beginning was probably more my team, because it had less of a sensation to it. It could have even been my higher self. And then all of a sudden this energy moves in. It was very high vibration. It was very divine type feeling. It was more female related energy, very loving, very powerful. And so somewhere it just shifted.
Yeah.
But I don't interrupt that. Yeah, I don't interrupt that.
Yeah, I know. And I think that's beautiful that you don't. And I think it's beautiful to hear you say that, though. When you are channeling, you can feel the energy shift. Because a lot of times too, when I'm channeling with people in the way that I normally channel, it's like I can sense that energy shift as well.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting when all of a sudden I'm talking to someone's higher self. I feel that shift into a higher wisdom than their higher self. So I know what you're saying. I don't sense it through feeling in my body like you do, but I sense the energy in the conversation, in the words. So I
gotcha. Oh, sure.
that.
Which if you kind of, if you read this later or you listen to it, you'll kind of notice, oh, that was really interesting where everything just, the message started to change. Well, that's because the where it was coming from, the source changed. The source shifted. It was someone, rather than, I think the first part was probably more higher self than anything else. Right. I'm sure it was supported by my team, so to speak, which is what I call it.
No, I think that's beautiful and I love it.
So I was curious, a couple of things in here. It was interesting where it had said, that's why she's here, a most patient and willing participant who desires to see good, seeks answers of her own, and yet wants to unify those who do this work to create a connection of messages and beings who support the greater good. And I think I kind of already knew that, but that makes sense for you, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that pegs me completely.
Gotcha. So how did you feel overall that the message, what was that? Is that going to be beneficial for people? Let's discuss that in the sense that it's kind of generic, but then again, there were some specific instructions in there. If you really look at it again.
Right. There are specific instructions in there. And I felt really good about it because ego, first of all, is a huge thing that comes up in a lot of my sessions. I'll have people who will come in that have been reading about the ego and they've read things like we need to get rid of the ego and we need to dispel the ego. And the ego is needed as long as we're in human form. It is so important that we have ego. So it was really great today to hear that talk about the ego and how important it is. And, unfortunately, I do meet people who have taken the ego and they really follow the ego and everything. And they forget about the spiritual aspect of themselves and they allow the higher self or the ego to control. And what our work is helping people bring that more in alignment so that the ego and, yourself, the higher self is working together.
Well, and that was really, they were using the word divinity. And I certainly hope that, we have to realize when we're channeling higher messages, sometimes the language is different because it's a good indicator for us that what we're receiving isn't coming from our own mind, right? Because I wouldn't choose to perhaps have used those words if they were from me personally, my own mindset.
Your ego mind.
So we have to kind of look at, don't get hung up on the words in the channeled messages, but recognize the intention that's behind them. And you were right. They were talking about the value of the ego. And we tend to think that it's bad and I'm not going to have an ego at some point. It's like, no, you're going to have an ego. But if the ego is balanced with divine, then it's in service.
Yeah.
And so we're not flawed. I love that. We're not aired. Our trauma has a purpose. Our tragedy has a purpose. And I think this came up probably the very first week that we were channeling as well, as we tend to look at ourselves as wrong or bad. And we've gotten this mindset that everything has to be fixed and repaired. And I think that this message, at least from my perspective, was about being okay with all of those things.
Yes. And I agree. It is being okay. I spent the day in the hospital with my friend on Sunday. And, but I was listening to her speak and talk to herself. And I'm picking up on all of these flaws that she sees all the time. And I'm like, okay, I need to help her reword what she's speaking because they're not flaws. They are learning and we have them for reasons. And if we can start to love those things about ourselves, that just helps us, ascend or become more light beings, more divine. if we
And that
just
came out in the message,
love
even
it.
talking about the gifts that
Yeah.
come from these things. And one of the things they just gave a silly example, which isn't really very silly, but when we start fearing death or when we see the ending of our life, do we remain in that fear, or do we all of a sudden realize that we've been giving, they use the words everlasting life, and all of a sudden there's a gift from our fear of death. And so that was just an extreme example of recognizing that there's a gift in all of these flaws and our thought process about how we're wrong.
Yeah. And that's one thing that we're not taught in our culture, is how death is divine, because we're taught to fear death. But when you start to, get more into that spiritual journey, you understand the death process. And I've been involved with the whole death thing for years, because my grandfather died on my 16th birthday, and I started reading my first book about what happens to us after we die. And so my mind is way open about what happens after death. And when you have that mindset, you stop fearing death, because you know that there's something far greater on the other side. And it's like you view it totally different. But the majority of the world out there right now is fear death, because that's what we're programmed, to fear death. And if you look at some of the other cultures, the Indian culture and other areas of the world, death is beautiful, and it's a celebration.
It's very different. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that's what, when my husband passed away, I didn't want to have a funeral, right? I wanted to have a celebration of life, because I wanted people to come together and celebrate his life.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
To me, funerals are so heavy and dense, and but gosh, we had, he loved Texas barbecue, so we had barbecue, and we just celebrated all the beautiful.
That was the tribute.
Yeah, I mean, it was totally amazing, and to me, it just came from such a different place than when you go to a funeral. And that's the way that we should be celebrating someone's life. How did they touch people in the world? How did I touch people? That's why when I leave here, I want to know that I touched people's lives. I made a difference. It was important for me to be here. And I know that all of us are here for a reason, and all of us are here to be important to humanity. How are we affecting humanity and helping humanity move forward and growth?
Because you're right. We all are given an ego for a reason. And I think that came out in the message here a little bit too, that we have a purpose and a reason, even if we feel like we're going through a difficult time. It's like, well, I can't be fulfilling my purpose because I have cancer. Let's just use that as an example. My mother passed when I was 18. So she died, I think she was like around 34 years old of cancer. It's like, how can you be fulfilling your purpose? But it doesn't mean that you aren't fulfilling your purpose. It may not look the way that you think it is, but what is that purpose? And asking and connecting with that higher wisdom that can get you through living your purpose while you're going through whatever your suffering or your trauma is. So they weren't negating the difficulties of human life at all. Right. But understanding that even in those moments, that purpose can be fulfilled. We think of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and his explanation of life in the concentration camps, and how they found meaning and purpose and in suffering. So not to say that I don't want to focus on negativity, but we tend to think that we're only fulfilling our purpose if we're in this perfect state and our life is perfect and we're not flawed and we're not trauma and we're not dealing with disease or anything else. And I think we're missing the point. I think is part of what was coming through for some of this today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that book, Viktor Frankl's book is so amazing. And I encourage other people to read it, because
it's a wonderful book.
That really is our mindset, is our belief system, and how we view things is really so powerful, and how we maneuver through the pain or the suffering or the difficult times that we deal with. How we see them is what's going to help us survive, right? Just like in him.
And the whole point of the title of the book is it's man's search for meaning. And ultimately, aren't we all searching for meaning? That's the point.
Yeah.
But there's still meaning in suffering. We can still have love and wisdom and connection and purpose despite suffering. So we tend to think that we're only doing those things when we're in a state of joy. So And there were some interesting, they talked about asking, how we need to be sure that we're asking. And we discussed that earlier where, we said, well, I sat down and I asked, what is it that I need to know? What's holding me back? Am I moving forward in my purpose or my passion? Or what's the healing that I need, whether it's for my physical body? We have to ask, and then we have to be willing to let that information come in.
Right. And, I know like myself, I'm going through this whole, I have a lot of pain in my legs, and I've had it since 2012. Right. And it's like, I've been told I need to ask, but also I have to do the work, and I know I can heal myself. They've told me that I need to listen to music. I need to do the singing bowls. I need to write. And so we have that power within us to heal ourselves. But when we connect to the higher wisdom and we get the information, it's not just the information that we get, but it's the actions that we take after.
Which was very clear in this. It was very clear that there's only so much we over here on the other side can do, right? It's like we're here to help, support, enlighten, illuminate, but it's on us. It's on us
to really follow through and to do
the one that does that. And that's the hard part. So,
it is the hard part. Even though you have all the answers and you've gotten all that wisdom, and you still resist that, but it's beautiful at the same time. I love it.
And I like that they brought up the fact that, this is another thing, and that I also, especially doing mediumship, I realize is people think that when you pass over that suddenly everything is perfect. There are changes, most definitely, because you're in a different dimension, you're in a different you're in a different perspective, but spirits still struggle. They're still learning life stuff. They're still going through their traumas, their healing. So the point is divinity doesn't happen upon death. Divinity's now. And again, divinity being awareness, because that was the key word. They said it's awareness. It's here. It's now. Why are we waiting for it? What do we think is going to happen? You don't just die and all of a sudden you get your angel wings and life is better. You're still going to have to deal with the awareness. So do it now, do it later. It's okay. You get to choose, but that's where the solution lies.
Right. And I love the fact that they brought up the free will choice, because it is all free will choice.
Of course. Yeah.
Beautiful.
They're always very clear about that. The other thing too that I will bring up, it's just really interesting in terms of channeling. I also hear words that I go, that's really interesting. Why would you use that word? So in the very last paragraph, if people are reading it, it says, we know it's not easy, and yet implore you to seek God now, not the form of God as you might see, but rather that higher godliness that exists and abounds all around us. You can call it love, light, salvation, redemption, or even pacification. And when I heard that word, those are the words that make me stop. And I have to tell myself, don't think about it. Just keep going. Just keep going. Because you wouldn't think of God. You think of God maybe as love or light or salvation or redemption, but I never would have thought of God as pacification. So I always start questioning myself and I go, I hear that
what
right?
I mean?
So I've learned, don't censor it. Just keep going. And then the first thing I did was I went to Google, what the heck is pacification?
Right.
And I think that's okay. And that's important thing is when you hear a word, don't censor, just write it down. Yeah. Sure. Maybe I got it off a little bit because sometimes we don't hear it perfectly. But then again, I went to look of pacification and I went peaceful submission, appeasement. And I went, okay, maybe we don't look at God as love and light and divinity, but can we look at it in terms of just a peaceful submission, Yeah. And so I went, that actually, if you look at some of the definition, it's a relevant way to look at it. Maybe we don't believe in God or this higher power, but can we still peacefully submit to it?
Yeah. And that's really true.
And so I'm like, actually, it really does fit if you think about it. So it wasn't about getting caught up on God. And I think that was the last point I wanted to make, because I do sometimes get conversations where the terminology is God. And I don't want to go religious with that. Sometimes it is religious, and I'll straight up say they're talking about Christianity and they'll go there. And again, don't censor it because it might be very insightful for you.
Well, and that's the whole thing too, because these messages, they're going to guide those to these messages that need this message.
Sure.
And this may, I mean, it may be a Christian person who needs
Absolutely.
to hear that today.
Absolutely.
It may be somebody else who's on that search and journey. So, that's why they tell us not to have any judgment towards whatever comes out too, because they're going to guide the people to the message. And if somebody's listening to it and it doesn't resonate with it, they're just going to keep moving on.
Yeah.
So if they don't resonate with it, so the people who are resonating with it need to hear it. It needs to be out for them. So yeah, I find it beautiful. So